Hi, everyone. Welcome to the show today. So today I have a very special guest, Robin. Could you teach me how to pronounce your last name? I just don't want to butcher it.
Oh, well, everybody butchers it. Everybody pronounces it as it's an MC, but it's Mac, M-A-C, MacFarlane.
MacFarlane. Nice.
Yes.
But it's still European descent?
Well, yeah, that's, now we're going to go down a weird path already, Grace. We're starting. It's not my original maiden name. It was the name when I got married the first time. And when I divorced, I kept the name because it had been established professionally. So I am remarried, but my husband is very kind and understanding that I didn't change my name.
I love it. I already did something really private out here.
Yes, you did. And very few people probably know that.
Awesome. So I love this. So you talk about you established professionally with your current names. So tell us who not know you, what you do.
Well, I think the people that do know me, what they know me for is I do an awful lot of training and educating with the use of remote collars for dog training. I've been a dog trainer for quite a while, and collars became something that not only did I find useful for my pet owners, but I just became very passionate about trying to help people understand them better. So if they did choose to use it, then they had some resources. But that, came with pros and cons because it's a very controversial, to some people, it's a very controversial topic.
Well, before we start earlier, we talked about we're just going to wing it. So obviously there's going to be controversial topics come up. And you've been in business for a really long time, right?
I have been in business for a pretty long time. That's My Dog is the name of the training company that I have out here in Dubuque, Iowa. And we will be 23 years in business come May. And I had actually started training about 4 years prior to that. So yeah, I've been training for a long time, but I've had the company 23 years.
So what make you want to be a dog trainer?
I never would have thought in my wildest dreams, when I was a little girl, that this is where I would have ended up. We said at the beginning of the show, Grace, we were going to wing it. And I think that's kind of like the motto for my life is just wing it and see what happens. I started out and I really wanted to be a veterinarian when I was a kid. So I went down that path and, Bachelor of Science degree, thought I was going to go into vet school, got disenchanted because here in the Midwest, it was really doing some gross things to cows. And we're talking about the 80s. I'm like, I'm not putting my hand there. No, it is not happening for me. So then I was like, okay, I have this degree. What am I going to do? And so I thought, well, gosh, I'm from Iowa. Why don't I move to the West Coast and study marine animals? And I can do something with dolphins because that sounds realistic when you're 22 years old. But anyway, so I went out there and I went broke working on a master's degree. So I ended up getting a job in a vet clinic to make some money. And out there, I was working in a small animal clinic, and I really fell in love with the medical aspect. So I ended up being a technician for a number of years, and then I got into hospital management for a couple of years. And that's really, I guess, what introduced me to the reality that so many pet owners needed help. And so I fell into it just really trying to find solutions for people that were struggling. They were coming to the vet clinic and they were talking to me or to my boss and that kind of thing. And I thought, well, I'll look up some ideas and we'll see if we can help you. And the more I did it, the more I liked it. So fell into it.
Yeah, I talked to several dog trainers. They all kind of like, oh, just fall on my lap. I'm like, right. So, you were a vet tech at the beginning. Yeah. So how that experience helped you to be a dog trainer in the long run?
That's a good question, because honestly, I think that is probably one of the pivotal things of why I was successful very early on. And as a vet tech, you're in a position where it's a busy clinic. You've got multiple doctors. You have one doctor who's saying, look, go back and get, the lab that needs surgery and get them on the table and get them prepped. And you go back to get the lab out of the kennel and he's cowering in the corner and he's baring teeth at you. And you're like, Meanwhile, I know the doctor is waiting and we've got to get this dog on the table and there's no time to really think about this a lot. I think it honed my ability to read body language and to adapt and figure out how do I get these dogs to trust me relatively quickly, because it was always a stressful situation. And you're the one, when you're the technician, you're the one that's dealing with those situations, and you have to manage them quickly and efficiently and successfully so that, the veterinarian can get his job done.
Wow, that's really great point. You pointed out it's really the body language. You're like, oh, this dog's doing this, how I can gain dog's trust really like right now so I can take it to the table, right?
Yes. And you couldn't, the reality was if they're going to be put under anesthesia for surgery, you can't be offering them food at that time. They have to be fasted. So you really, I think without even realizing it, and it took me years to realize that when people say, oh, how did you know to do that? It took me a long time to realize I learned that from my time as a vet tech, how to manage my body language and communicate in a way that was very non-confrontational.
Could you give the audience several examples? Because I think a lot of dog owners really not quite understand, like, hey, I just do this to my dog all the time. They didn't even realize what they actually communicating to their dogs.
Yeah. Well, when in that situation, when I was going to get a dog out, I'm a stranger to the dog. And so I had to be very aware. I learned quickly, don't stare at them. Don't approach them directly. Don't reach over the top of the head or you're going to get bit. And so if you can't do those things, you start to think, well, what can I do instead? I learned how to back into a kennel space. I learned how to bend down. I learned how to keep my hands low and underneath of the chin and the nose so that I could reach up from underneath. So all of those kind of things were so much less confrontational. And that way, then I could get my leash on the dog, get the slip lead on, and then we could just move away. So those are some simple things. I think, as dog trainers, we do a lot to try to teach dog owners, stop doing that very direct contact that we as humans think is, honest and trustworthy. We look each other in the eye, we shake hands, we reach out, and the dog is going, whoa, dude, you are freaking me out. And so you completely do the reverse of that. You kind of do the opposite.
I actually don't think humans like those either. Right.
Some of us don't. I'm not a big
right.
hugger. I'm not a big hugger unless I really know somebody well.
So I'm from China and we don't hug ever. And we occasionally handshake out of like professionalism, your handshake. But in general, when we see each other, it's a hi. That's all we do. Like we never really hug. And when we watch, Western movies, people like kissing on the cheeks and stuff, like we're like, ew.
So it would be considered rude to make that kind of very forward gesture towards somebody.
It would be. The people are like, whoa, what's that about, right? And so when I first came here, like people will hug each other, and I was just told, okay, that's just a custom. That's what you do. And over time, you get used to it. You're like, okay, it is a way to show affection, right? And then so that's kind of you start learning those. And it's very interesting that you brought this up on the dog owners like want to look at the dog, and some dogs will look at you too, right? And then that's have different problems down the road sometimes. Mm-hmm. And I work with a lot of feral dogs and from Asian countries, from Asia, and they don't like to be hugged. Like they're like, don't touch me, right? Don't look at me, don't face me at all, right? And then so it's kind of really interesting when I see dog owners feel like that they're so struggling with this. So I'm sure in your career that you see dog owner who are really struggling with, they don't quite get the experience of the dog, like, why can I do that? So how would you like explain to the dog owners, hey, this is kind of how you want to approach the difference between you treat a human versus you treat your dog, and to help them like change that mindset?
Well, and it's certainly, it always depends on the dog and the individual relationship. But one of the things I tell people when I'm trying to describe those personalities, for instance, you brought up feral dogs, and feral dogs would like us to act like they're invisible, I think. I think that's more comfortable for them. So one of the things I tell people is, do imagine yourself going to a different country where you don't know the language, you don't know the customs, you don't know your way around. Would you like to be rushed up to and somebody staring right at you and getting in your face and reaching out to touch you when you don't exactly know what's happening? I think any of us could probably at least imagine what a situation like that would feel like. I know for me here in the Midwest, we're a pretty rural community for the most part. And a lot of the people that I work with can identify with the process. I've said to them, years ago, I went to New York and I went to downtown Manhattan. And for a kid coming out of a town of 1,200 people to be put in the center of Manhattan was a intimidating and daunting experience. And I was like, I just don't really want anybody to talk to me right now unless I ask for help and I initiate. I don't know who I trust. It's kind of a scary feeling. So just feeling like I could drift through and be a little invisible was a lot more secure feeling for me. And I think most people can understand, if they've been in some sort of situation where you don't know the landscape very well, that you don't want to be the center of attention at that point. And that's how many of our dogs feel. They just don't want to be the center of focus in situations unless you've already built a trusting relationship with them.
That's really powerful, that you try to describe a scenario that people try to really step in their dog's shoes. How similar things happen, like, people don't like kennel their dog because it's a human feeling. Oh my gosh, I don't want to be in a small space. Oh my gosh, my dog's being jailed up. And so again, from your perspective, like, do you try to describe a scenario for people to feel better about that, or just how you approach that for people like having a really hard time to kennel their dog?
Well, I think particularly, obviously, the big reason we probably all advocate for kennels, Grace, is because when you get a new dog, they don't know the rules, they don't know the landscape, so it's going to help them settle in. And of course, we both know that a dog feels more comfortable that way. Again, I think I would probably make this scenario to say, you're going to travel wherever, let's say New York City again, and you're going to book a room you're going to book with the Ritz-Carlton, but at the Ritz, you don't have an individual room. Y'all get to bed down and sleep in one big community room together. How comfortable do you feel with that? Do you feel more secure being in the midst of this situation with strangers that you don't really know yet? You might be able to carve out a little space on your cot in the corner, but would you rather be able to go into your room, close the door, and know nobody can get to me right now? I can actually decompress because I know I'm in a safe, confined space. And I think that if we can help people understand how it is for the dog in these situations, I think then we can take away the misconception that it's locked behind a jail cell. This is a private room that gives the dog a little peace of mind for a limited amount of time to just decompress. And that's so important for people to understand about kennels, because you hit the nail on the head. I think more and more people are misunderstanding and thinking that it's a negative experience for the dog, and that's not the case.
I usually try to tell my clients, we really see human behaviors that we actually like cozy place too. Even though I think the fact we want bigger house, bigger properties, and we want to live in a castle is really because how that present to the public about your social position. Like you're very wealthy or whatever, so you have bigger house. But the reality is the upkeep of those houses. I always joke to my clients, I said, well, it's like haunted mansion. Do you really want to live there if just by yourself? Right? And people are like, that is kind of scary. So that's how but I really like you describe, like, it's like a slumber party, right? Just go there and be an open place, see how you feel about it.
Well, especially when you, like I said, when you're fairly new to something, and the whole goal is, right, for our dogs, we're not putting them in there, we're taking them for walks, we're spending time, we're playing, et cetera, et cetera. This is when it's time to sleep. And if we're talking about when we go to work and we have a dog that's not reliable yet to be loose in the house, what do you expect him to do when you're gone anyway? You want him to sleep or chew on his bone, on his chew toy? Well, he can do that in a kennel. Isn't he going to feel a lot more secure, like you said, not having responsibility for the whole place? I know if I fall asleep or if I want to go asleep, I'm going to either go in my bed or I wrap myself up in a little cocoon blanket in the corner of the couch because it makes us feel secure. I don't splay out in the middle of the floor because it might get stepped on. So exactly, we all seek comfort by that confined feeling. I think it goes back to infancy when we were babies and you were swaddled up tightly.
Oh, I love that. My kid is 16 months old. So you brought this up and like, oh, I remember those days. But at the same time, come back because my kid like really hated to be swaddled, right? And we're trying to work on that is because they're like, okay, she need to get used to that. It's actually good for her, even though she might not getting it at first, which is really interesting because people tell me, oh, my dog hates it because my dog will whine, my dog will cry, my dog will try to break the jail. So how we as dog trainer can like help the dog owner, okay, maybe that's a process, how we help the dog to go through that process and still knowing maybe they really quite get what's that for at the first place. That's why they're having those behaviors, how we help the owner get over that hump, like before they give in, like, okay, my dog can be kenneled.
Yeah. And that's a challenge, isn't it? I mean, I think a big part of our responsibility sometimes is being an emotional support system for our clients to just say, instead of, yes, he's still whining, is he still whining for 20 minutes? Are we down to 17 minutes? Then we're moving in the right direction. Does he relax a little sooner? Is he able to chew on his bone today where 3 days ago he was too stressed? We have to look at those micro bits of progress, and we have to acknowledge them and know that we're going in the right direction. And I think, again, that's true for any of us. One of the things when I'm working with puppy owners and they get frustrated with behavior not changing quickly enough because their dog doesn't like something, I remember now my children are 25 and 29 now, but I still very much remember trying to teach them to tolerate having their teeth brushed. And I remember my son trying to teach him to tolerate you have to be in a car seat when he was a toddler. He did not like it. He did not like it. This was a child that would scream and buck and go rigid and try to get out of it. But that didn't mean that I quit. I was a good mom. You have to learn to be in your car seat and you're going to learn to have your teeth brushed. Did that mean that I wrestled him and forced him to do it? No, but we made little tiny bits of progress all the time until we got to the point where it wasn't dramatic and a problem anymore. So I think it's our job to coach people and hold their hand and help them understand we're looking for little pieces of progress every day. Hopefully you're going to be a couple weeks down the road and this is a distant memory, but let's help the dog learn how to get some self-composure and deal with this.
Really love this. I like the phrase you use, micro progress. I always joke about everybody like everybody want a dog training as Amazon Prime, right? Like just can this be done in 2 days? Just fix my dog, right?
Sure, no problem.
When you first start dog training, like what's any like specific dog in your early career that really make you feel like a defining moment?
Oh gosh. I can't think of one that was a defining moment. There's certainly plenty of dogs that taught me defining lessons. There was a dog, this was many years ago, and he was a very, very beautiful German bred Rottweiler, enormous dog, intact male, about 4 years old. And they were having some problems with him. And when people talk about aggression, I think my outlook on it has changed so much. Most dogs are making noise and they're just loud and they're kind of obnoxious. This dog was not that at all. He was calm, cool, and collected. And I remember him working with him and just trying to have him follow me. And he was doing it for a certain amount of time and then he was done. He didn't want to do it anymore. And when I started to pressure him a little bit, he put his 2 paws up on my left shoulder and just very quietly breathed in my ear, "If you make one more mistake, I will take your face off." He never made a sound. He never growled. He never barked. He never nipped. He was the most calm, cool, collected dog that I can remember in the vast majority of my career. And it made the hair stand up on the back of my neck. This was a dog that was very, very serious, that he was not going to be told what to do by a stranger. And he was very much in charge of his own decision making. And you were going to have to figure out a different way to deal with him because pressure was not going to end well. Where I think a lot of dogs will acclimate to pressure relatively quickly. They're like, okay, I don't mind being a follower. I can deal with this. So I think that was a very defining moment to help me realize there are those occasional dogs that, well, there's my occasional dogs making a whole lot of, hey guys, come here. That's enough. Diva, sorry about that. Diva, come here. Neighbor probably came home. But there are those dogs that don't fit. Sorry. Diva. Lay down. Diva. Lay down. Sorry. They're those dogs that don't fit the average. There are those dogs that the average person is going to really struggle to have. They're far and few between, but they're out there. I think previous to having met that dog, I was under the assumption that all dogs are safe. All dogs are, kind of fall into the same type of behavior profile. Like I said, that dog made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. That dog was different. He never growled, never barked, never anything, but there was a calm confidence that he had that I had not experienced previous to that. That was only a couple years into my career. It gave me a very different respect about how I evaluated dogs and what I paid attention to. I think I slowed down my approach after that because I think I was quicker to put pressure on a dog back then than I am now.
Wow, I love this. If you don't mind, I dig a little deeper on this. When you start sharing, my thought was that's probably sounds like this dog pretty confident in general. Mm-hmm. And he's also probably dominant.
Super dominant. And that's not a word that I use too often.
Exactly. Yeah. Because I this is a word like I tend to ask all my guests who in dog training world, let my guests define what dominant really mean for them. So in your opinion, how would you describe when you say, hey, this dog is dominant? And how we can help the owner to understand most of their dogs are not? Yeah,
that's a good question. Because I think, it's a word that gets used so frequently from the average pet owner. My dog's alpha, my dog's dominant. And I would say 99% of the time, 99.8% of the time, not the case. Your dog's a loudmouth. He's a little bit obnoxious. He's a brat. He's a little pushy, but he's not dominant. And then there's the flip side of that, where I think some people or trainers or philosophies would say, it doesn't exist. Well, I personally think that's nonsense. To me, that dog that is truly dominant, you can live with that dog, you can work with that dog, but you had better establish the right relationship with that dog. And in the wrong home, that dog is going to run roughshod and cause a problem. That dog is extremely quiet. That dog is not riled by much. There isn't a lot that causes that dog to rush to anything. He will saunter and take his own sweet time because he knows once he gets there, he will solve the problem if he needs to. I wish I could think of a good analogy, I've got to think about this. He's like the Clint Eastwood of the dog world. He's not in a hurry, but he's going to take care of the game if it needs to be done. And he's slow to make that choice. He doesn't get involved in nonsense. It doesn't interest him. And most people, I don't think I've ever really truly encountered that dog.
Yeah, I in my career, not so long career, I only met one dog. I'd say on the scale of dominance, he's probably a little bit higher up compared to most of the dogs I work with. But that dog also happened to be really insecure and with high anxiety because he's a feral dog. So make that dog actually extremely dangerous. He had put teeth on people since he's 3-4 months old. Like he just go for the bites, and he can't go to the vet office. And literally the vet will reject him, said your dog's too aggressive. They have to like put him under in order to give him a physical exam. So that was a pretty tough case. And I personally think that dog also placed to the wrong home. So you mentioned that your opinions on aggression has changed over the years. So could you elaborate a little more on those?
Well, aggression isn't a behavior. I should say that aggression is a response to certain situations. I think it's hard to label a dog simply, this is an aggressive dog. There are dogs in situations that will show an aggressive behavioral response to that situation. Oftentimes, I think just for trying to help my clients deal with labeling, I will change the word and I'll say reactive, because I don't want them. So often I think people think, well, I have an aggressive dog, therefore he's a bad dog, maybe I can't keep him. Especially like let's think in terms of dog to dog aggression problems. Many dogs that have problems with other dogs can get along with certain dogs just fine, but they can't just be cut loose in the dog park. And so therefore people think, well, he's dog aggressive. Well, that's not a fair analogy. If you take me, who's a pretty dyed-in-the-wool introvert, and you put me in the middle of a frat party some night, I'm going to come out swinging after about 10 minutes because I'm like, get away from me, you bunch of crazy people. I don't want that kind of energy. And and that's just a preference. But by the same token, we could all sit down at a dinner table and have a nice, quiet, dinner with 10 people that I know, and it's going to be totally fine. So I think we have to be careful in helping our clients understand aggression in the context in which it's being expressed. There are times where it is completely appropriate the way this dog is behaving, and we cannot expect to change who he is. We can expect to help him manage his behavior so that it's not inappropriate. We can teach him, different forms of expressing it. But it's really our responsibility to not put him in some of these situations where he's just going to be completely overwhelmed. It's not fair.
I love that you mentioned number one is really about putting the context. I think that's a lot of people missing nowadays is they through a label or words. My dog have separation anxiety since he's 8 weeks old, right? I'm like, what?
Yeah.
So I'm like, no.
Because he barks because he wants to get out of the crate, right?
Yeah, right. And then they'll be like, oh my gosh, my dog's aggressive because my dog bark at other dogs, right? Then they determine, okay, that must be aggression. So I really like your part is like it's a response within a context. So your dog could be showing some aggressive behaviors, but that's not equal to your dog is an aggressive dog. That's really powerful here.
Well, and I think, it's so important to understand that's instinct. Humans are no different. I personally, coming from a background of biology and looking at we're all animals, supposedly we're the highest evolved. I think that's debatable from time to time, but we're all animals, and these instinctual behaviors are a part of each and every one of us. I'm going to guess, Grace, we would become very aggressive if somebody tried to hurt our children. It wouldn't take much to push us into the aggressive behavior category. So it is contextual. It's within any of us, and it's certainly, we've got to understand it's within our dog's scope of behaviors, and that's why we have to understand what are those issues for our dogs? What do we need to step up and protect them from and advocate for them?
How do you first be introduced to the infamous remote collar?
Oh gosh, as a trainer, I think, because we're talking I think I bought my first collar in 99, 98, 99. And I bought it and I took it out of the case and I didn't know how to use it and I was afraid of it. And I put it back in the case and it sat there for months. And then a friend of mine who has since passed away, a mentor, an early mentor of mine, invited me to come to a workshop that she was hosting. And so I had gone there. I had watched somebody presenting on remote collars. The techniques made sense to me as far as the idea of this game of hot and cold, pressure on, pressure off. And the more I started studying it, lots of videos. There's early work by Rex Carr, Jim and Phyllis Dobbs. There's tons of people that had been doing work previous to my ever being exposed to remote collars. Started studying some of that, gathering up books, and most importantly, getting on board with some of the clients that I had been working with that we were struggling with simple things like a good solid recall. And figuring out, if we can work with your dog, if you trust me and we can do this. And I started to realize how quickly, we could get solutions for people. And the more I went down that path, the more it gave me confidence to start to expand the skill set for a variety of behaviors with the dogs, and eventually even incorporating remote collars into a lot of the rehab work that I do. So it's certainly been a journey, and I wouldn't say for 1 second that I have all the answers. I definitely still study. I've, for the past couple of years, been trying to hit some of the workshops in the upland bird training world, which is not my genre at all. But I have found a lot of value in going to watch other experts that I'm in the pet world. I've gone to see protection folks, bird dog folks, retriever folks, and there are always little tidbits that I can bring back from that because I'm always working with this whole variety of breeds. So if I better understand what that dog was built for, then I can try to figure out what collar applications or what training did they do in their world that I can bring back to the pet game and help my clients deal with their companion.
It's a never-ending learning process as a dog trainer. And over all those years, what are some of the significant maybe improvements you have done in terms of your own techniques when it comes to remote collar?
Oh my gosh. That's a big question. And it's hard to know what's significant because, when you're on a journey, it's not like you go along and then you step and then you step. It's just this gradual thing. And then sometimes you plummet, of course, and you fall on your face and you fail. I mean, when I first started using remote collars, I was minimalistic with incorporating food with it. And I think that was just simply my lack of experience. Like I couldn't walk and chew gum at the same time. So I'm using the collar. How do you incorporate the tools of toys or food? So certainly that became a bigger piece of the puzzle once I got more comfortable. One of the things that I did realize is, and I'm not sure a lot of remote collar trainers talk about this, but the cadence or the rhythm at which we're tapping the button, in my opinion, influences the I hate to use the word emotion, but there's like a biofeedback mechanism with the dog and how it influences whether you can calm them down or rev them up. And when I say cadence, I think of it like a metronome. Anybody that plays music, you got the metronome, that tick, 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 tick. So obviously when you're using a remote collar, you're using an electrical impulse. And there's different ways to use it, but essentially it's giving a tactile tick, tick, tick sensation. So when depending on how you're using it, you can go faster or you can go slower. You can use cadence to influence the dog's emotional experience and change how they're communicating or how they're connecting with you. And the example, I know that's hard for people sometimes to wrap their head around, but again, I'm going to use a human analogy and I'm going to go back to the days when my children were infants. And if you think of an infant that's really stressed out and they're screaming and they're kind of losing it, one of the things that we do as mothers is we pat them, pat, 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 and we're swaying and we're doing it kind of quick because the child is emotionally experiencing this distress. They're screaming. And as they calm down with that pat, 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 what do? We start to change the cadence. And eventually the child starts to calm down. One of the things that I found with dogs that are really amped up is I can use a quicker cadence. And then as they start to pay attention to me, I can change that cadence to bring them down and calm them down, getting them paying attention. By the same token, if I have that kind of sluggish dog that tends to work slowly, I start out slowly. So I'm matching where they are at that time. I start out slowly, but then I can tick, 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 and get them moving with more prance and more animation and kind of wake them up by using that quicker beat, if you will. I wish I had all the words to articulate this well, but one of my friends who studied with me years ago was also a musician, and he talked about how that this is used in musical terminology. And he said, you have the ability to kind of cue in on that, Robin. You kind of know what beat that dog is marching to, and you have the ability to use an electronic pulse to bring them to the beat you want them to march to. And that's how you're creating that connectedness with the dog, which I thought was very interesting. But then when I started thinking about how much we do some of this work with collars with deaf dogs, why does it work so well? We can use this electronic tap as a biofeedback mechanism to connect with them. It's a very fascinating thing. I wish somebody would do some science on it someday, because I think when I talk about it to some people, they think I'm crazy, but I've seen way too many experiences that it works.
Oh, that's so fascinating. What pop up in my mind is Morse code. You know, you want to give the dog almost like the dog get it. Okay, this is what you try to tell me right now. You try to tell me calm down, or you try to distract me, or you try to, hey, it's time to go home, and whatever that might be. And I like you describe, you know, I use emotion in my training, but I try to tell my clients, your dog have emotion, but not exactly the same like us, but your dog do have emotions, and how we can work with those emotions to help your dog change the perspective of the things that they might react to. And it's so fascinating that you mentioned this. You know, it's interesting that research is hard. I tell a lot of things really for dog trainers I tell my clients just from experience. There's no scientific proof, but I know it worked because it worked.
Yeah, I know.
And most of the research nowadays about remote collar all horribly done and with completely bias for certain propagandas. And I think the other things, really to do research like this, it's going to be a expensive process, and you have to follow people and follow dogs, have to evaluate each dogs, and in order to get, you know, where the baseline is and what the improvements are.
Yeah.
So, but I think it's so fascinating.
I do too. And I hope someday somebody does it. I hope somebody can go into it open-minded. You know, I hope that there's a number of really good remote collar trainers out in the world right now. There are people that would be very worth studying their work rather than the preconceived notion that let's get out to prove remote collars are harming dogs. That's not hard to do. That's not hard to do. You can certainly put these tools in the hands of somebody unknowing and prove that, you know, they can cause a problem, but we could do that with all sorts of things. And that's not going to really, that doesn't help anybody. Doesn't help trainers, doesn't help pet owners. How we get to that, I don't know. But I do know that we can use a tactile cueing system to create rapport with pets in a way that is not fully understood. And we do need more study on that.
Wow. You know, this is so fascinating for whoever listening when we release the show, is that this is something that really very unique to this particular tool. Most of the other tools you can use probably won't able to achieve the same goal to do it. And that's also what makes remote collars so unique and effective when used correctly, because you just can't do this thing with other things.
You can't. And there's so much versatility. I mean, I think, right off the bat, people think, well, obviously you use a remote collar and you stop unwanted behavior and you use positive punishment and that's what you do. Sure, you can do that. But boy, is that a limitation of what this tool is capable of, and we just have to get people to quiet down long enough to watch and listen and explore it. And if more people would be willing to do that, then maybe we could get some studies backed. Unfortunately, I think it becomes such a controversial thing. I think people are afraid to jump on board. Is it politically correct for a university to want to do something like this? I don't know the answer to that. But we're selling the tool short and what it can do for a lot of dogs if we don't look into it. I don't know about you, but I'm seeing a lot of dogs, more and more dogs get put on drugs. And that's very disconcerting to me.
Yeah, that's another topic. We're going to kind of hide here. We're going to come back to that topic because anyway, it's crazy. So back on remote collar. So you've been doing for so many years using remote collar. And how you help the people, like given they want to learn, want to change their minds, how you usually introduce the tool to the human, that's so they understand what's the goal you actually try to accomplish here.
Well, so for instance, in the training that we do at my facility, we have two options basically for people that want to do remote collar with their dog. They can either do a board and train, which means we take the dog for a set period of time and we get the dog started and then they come back and then we give them lessons, or they can do private lessons and we coach them. And what I have to do and what my staff has to do as trainers and as responsible advocates for this tool is we have to kind of evaluate the clients when they come in. Is this somebody that we feel has the patience and the time and the physical capability to do private lessons? Because it's not for everybody. I have a certain number of clients that are in an age bracket where the amount of walking and movement that it takes to get a young dog started might not be conducive for them. And that's where then we're going to have to put them in a board and train. A board and train has the advantage that a professional is starting the dog. It reduces the risk of some mistakes happening. And then when the client comes back into it, then we just have to teach them how to maintain because the dog has some collar literacy. But to answer your question, one of the things that I do very early on, and if anybody has ever watched any of my DVDs, people criticize and they say, why aren't you talking to the dog in the very beginning? Why aren't you talking to the dog? Why aren't you praising the dog? Why aren't you encouraging the dog? Why aren't you using words? Because I'm pointing out to the viewer that the collar has the ability to communicate all on its own. And if I can get people to take the remote and I show them obviously, how they can get this tactile cueing system to bring the dog closer to them, how they can use this cueing system to redirect attention to them. Once they understand that essentially it is like a game of hot and cold for the dog in that early learning phase. Once they understand that and their brain really wraps around, they don't have to use these words because the words are meaningless in the beginning. If they understand that and I get them on board with that, it's pretty easy afterwards. But that is the hardest, that's the leap that I have to get people to make because they all want to use their words right away. Tell them this, tell them that. And that's not the point. We're using a pulse system to communicate. So like a Morse code, kind of like you said.
We just need to put duct tape on everybody's mouth. Okay, no talking from this point on.
We've had classes where we have silent classes, and if they speak, they have to pay a penalty, and then we just give it to the shelter. So
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah, I think most people talk way too much. And then I do teach my clients to talk to their dog, but I'm like, okay, that's not your usual talk to your dog. Talk to your dog.
Right.
They rambles, right? They're just constantly talking on weird things, and then the kept-out dog, it's okay.
Right. When you're teaching, we want the words to be meaningful and instructive. Yeah, not just random noise.
Wow, I love what you just talked about, because I have interviewed several dog trainers. They use remote collar as well, but we never get a chance to really dive in on those techniques and stuff. And which is really interesting that you point this out, the way that really communicate with the dog, that really we don't need verbal communication at the beginning. So dog can really learn that language without being distracted by your voice or by your body language or whatever that might be. So dog can focus on, okay, I'm feeling this and what this mean.
So that's why I have them silent. Now, I also teach people that their body language does play an important part, as well as I don't ever allow clients to start doing any introduction off leash. And I think that's really important when people, if they're going to purchase a collar on their own and try to do it on their own, you should not be introducing this tool off leash. You have to have, if we're considering that the collar essentially has its own language, a tactile cueing system, well, the dog doesn't understand it. They don't understand it. Even if they know words like sit or come, I'm going to guess that the dog is not terribly reliable, which is why the person is choosing to use a remote collar. When you start using that tactile cue, it's as if you're communicating in a brand new language. So you have to have the translation to teach the dog the connection between the known language and the new one that you're going to introduce. In order to do that, you're using a leash and you're using body language. And I just tell people, look, here's what I need you to remember. Move away from your dog if you want them to come toward you. Move toward your dog if you want to push them away. Movement away pulls, movement toward pushes. And so, and I'll practice that, you know, I mean, I'm going to do this to the camera because it's weird, but I'll walk right people and I'm like, what do you want to do when I do that? You know, they want to back away. Well, so does your dog. So if you want your dog to come to you, move away because it makes them follow. And if they're attached to a leash, then the likelihood of failure on the dog's part is almost zero. The leash is going to help as that translation in conjunction with the body language.
I love that. Basically, just do against your instinct what you have been doing.
Do the opposite. Do the opposite. Your dog wants to go north, walk south. Your dog wants to go east, walk west. This is how we teach them to follow us.
It's so simple, right? It's so simple. Everybody can train dogs.
Piece of cake.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting sometimes talk about certain techniques. I just tell my clients too, because people call their dogs, they come or here, they tend to walk towards the dog. I'm like, hey, what are you doing? They're like, they didn't even realize they're doing that themselves. They're like, oh, I try to go grab my dog, so teach him to come to me. And I'm like, okay. And so that's, yeah. And then after you described it, like, it's really just the opposite how we usually do it. It's kind of against instinct. Like people say, oh, dog jump on me. And what they do, they back off. They're like, okay, yes. Right? And it's kind of opposite. I say, okay, you should kind of keep walking and see how your dog do. One of my clients have 4 labs. And so they will jump on her. And what they have been doing is turn around and wait. I said, okay, for some dog that works. I said, how that work out for you? She's like, oh, it's not working. And they have 4 dogs. So imagine that, right? It's never ending. So I showed her how to walk towards her dog. I think that problem solved like in 5 minutes.
Isn't that amazing?
Okay, I got it.
Yeah. She was doing ballet in her kitchen, probably turning from this one and turning from that one and turning from this one. And you solved it. Yeah, exactly. Do the opposite. Walk into the dog.
Thing about this drug use in dogs. So I'm glad you brought it up because it happened to the dog I work with a lot recent years, because they're feral dogs. They do have behavior issues because, you know, they're not that trusty to their owner. Most owner not sure what they're doing. And then they go to the vet. They're like, okay, your dog need to be put on drug and your dog will get better. So what's your experience from dog using drugs and how you usually help the owners?
Well, you know, I think what I'm seeing that I'm frustrated, and I get it. I get that owners are going to their vet and they feel, you know, they want to help their dog. They want to help their dog. But the veterinarians are in that difficult situation in that exam room. They don't necessarily know, for most veterinarians, behavior is not their thing. They're medical professional, but they want to give some sort of help. And the easiest thing to do is prescribe something that seemingly reduces symptoms. And sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But, I think we all know any drug comes with side effects. And sometimes the side effects are increased aggression. And if we push the dog over the edge, then that dog might lose his life. So I think prescribing drugs has to be done very thoughtfully. And the frustration comes when it's done without the advice of, this is a potential Band-Aid that may be helpful in conjunction with behavioral modification. And let's find you somebody that can help you with the behavioral modification. And so that's where it gets frustrating, is sometimes people come to me after the dog has been on drugs and the drugs didn't work, or the drugs made something worse. Well, now I don't know if I'm seeing a behavioral issue that is the result of the drugs. I don't know if I'm seeing something, has it multiplied because of the drugs? Is this what we're at ground level? So it just makes it very difficult for someone like me to kind of make a good assessment of what's the base level of the behavior here? Where are we at the starting point? I think probably you've seen many situations where the behavior is a learned behavior. And I always feel like if this is a learned behavior, it can be unlearned. We can teach something new. But if we don't get the dog clean and get them back to base level in a situation like that, I just don't know if I'm on the right course. And I hate feeling like I don't know if I'm on the right course.
So from your experience, all the dog you have worked with, say they were on drugs, like how you help them wean off, or what's your biggest
That's my
thing you're
other
seeing?
challenge. That's the challenge, is I don't know if it's unique to my area, but I don't feel like I get a tremendous amount of support within the veterinary community. There isn't open dialogue for sharing in the best interest of the dog. I just want to help the dog. I know they just want to help the dog. I'm not challenging expertise. I'm saying, what can we do to communicate? So my goal is to wean them off, obviously, depending on what the drug is, what the wean off process is. If the dog isn't on drugs to begin with, and we feel, and the owner really feels they do want to introduce something, then I am more likely to recommend like a tryptophan or, box flower essences. I'm going to start with those lesser potential problem additives into a behavioral case before we go to a prescription type of thing. But they are complicated. They are probably the biggest source of my frustration at this point in my career, because so often people's dogs are already on them or already put on them, and then the owner took them off themselves because the problem escalated. And just trying to unravel those situations is incredibly difficult.
Wow, you're certainly not alone.
Unfortunately, yeah.
When you talk about this, I'm for the audience, this is going to be obviously political incorrect, going to piss somebody off, right? But there's this category called veterinarian behaviorist that most of them have claimed they know how to train dogs, but I have not seen a single dog go see somebody have this title without come out with drugs. Mm-hmm. And it's one of the case I have was this dog was doing actually really well, and it was e-collar trained and everything going well. Then family have some events happen. So the dog, it's one of those people may say little weak nerve, they're always kind of nervous dog. So have some regression on the behaviors. So then they took the dog to a veterinarian behaviorist. So dog on drugs now. And then the veterinarian say e-collar caused anxiety.
Yep.
So I have to took off the collar. And so that's, those are the part of like, you can't really, at that point, me and my clients, I was just like, okay, I'm not gonna, argue with your veterinarian behaviors, but I can't work with your dog when your dog's like going through all of this. And it does introduce more issues. Just like you said, we can't find the baseline of the dog. We're actually not sure how the dog actually responds to a certain stimuli in natural behaviors, in a sense, because they are being manipulated. Mm-hmm. So that's definitely a struggle. And I have also found, not try to say dog owners are bad, or I think people are just busy nowadays. A lot of people have the thoughts of, okay, we're going to put our dog on drugs, but we're going to go train the dog. But that rarely happens. It's usually happen like they put dog on drug, kind of getting better. The dog is like maybe not screaming as much, maybe seems things kind of going well in a sense. Then that training never really happened. So I think that's the other challenge I have seen. The people do put dog on drugs, they're actually not really seeking trainings afterwards. And then they end up have dog on drugs. And then I have somebody call me like their dog being on drugs for 2 years or whatever with 3 combinations of drugs. Each drug try to fix the other drug's side effect. And then they end up with this dog like crazier than before, but they're too scared to take the dog off drugs at this point.
Yeah.
Because they weren't sure what's gonna happen.
It's and it's terrifying. And yeah, I want to reiterate, we're not trying to make anybody the bad guy. You're right. This isn't always the politically correct conversation, but I'm not known for political correctness a lot of times, so that's okay with me. My thing with veterinary behaviorists, again, if anybody's listening out there, my goal is, can we work together? The veterinary behaviors, let's talk to each other. Let's communicate. Because I 100% believe there are some dogs that need drug therapy. I will absolutely yield to their expertise on that. But personally, I have yet to see a veterinary behaviorist out with a client in the real world, helping them train the dog. Come out behind the desk, stop just sending email notes of what you're supposed to do. Here's the protocols to follow, and get out there and walk the client through it hand in hand. Get out there and show us how it works in the real world. What I find in the real world, mostly between us lowly dog trainers and the behaviorists, is conflict about who understands what and who has the knowledge to actually dispense to the clientele. That's not helping anybody. We have to work together. And as far as the drug of choice, the drug that I typically do not hear prescribed is, let's try more exercise. Before you do anything, let's actually try to do some more exercise for this poor dog. Because from my experience, many of these dogs that are having these problems, when I start digging into this dog's lifestyle, it's pretty sedentary. Yeah, he's got pent-up anxiety because you work 9 hours a day. You're too tired to do anything more than give him one little walk around the block at the end of the night. And on the weekend, you want to dump him in the dog park where he doesn't really like to be anyway. And so now we're blaming his fights on anxiety. Well, you know what, dear dog owner? You got to step it up. And you actually have to figure out that you have a breed that needs more than that from you. And there's no pill bottle that's going to do anything other than sedate him to your satisfaction. And that's not fair to anybody. That really irritates me.
I can see your passion come from the screen.
Been there. Been in the vet clinic before drugs were a thing, was holding the dogs that were euthanized for behavior problems. Grace, that's my background. That's where I started. And we've got to advocate for the dogs. And that starts more often than not in the veterinary office than it does with the trainer. More people go there initially to ask for help. And I think we need more veterinarians saying, you know what, you need to exercise him more. You know what, he's obese. He needs to take some weight off. This is not good for him. You know what, his coat looks terrible. Let's really see what we need to do about his diet, because maybe all those chemical additives that make his kibble look green, blue, and red aren't good for him, and they're causing some problems. When are we going to get to the point of having some honest conversation for the benefit of the dogs we say we love so much?
I can totally see that's something, wow, difficult, because I have clients that their dog obese, then they're being on prescription food. I'm like, your dog doesn't need prescription food. Let's just give your dog some real food.
Yeah. Give him some real food, biologically appropriate diet, and let's get him out and give him the exercise that he's built for. You have a retriever.
What's your take on breeds?
As far as favorite? Is that what you're asking?
You certainly should answer that, but my question is more like, how do you see breeds in terms of dogs' behaviors and matching people's, what lifestyle, what type of breed you might be benefit you when you have certain lifestyles?
Obviously it's all human manipulation that has created breeds. And we do see many of the designer breeds nowadays are being created for the more sedentary lifestyle, for more if we want to say the average pet owner, which I hate to use that word. I'm not sure that's a little, who's average? I don't know. But we see breeding going that direction. When people are looking for a specific dog, whatever it is, whatever breed is their thing, I really wish they would ask themselves why. And I'm not trying to stop anybody from getting any particular breed. Personally, I'm a pure breed advocate. I'm a little a snob, I guess, that way, because I do like breeds of dogs. But understand what they were created for. What are their tendencies? Does that mean that they're dramatically different to train from another breed? No, they're not different to train, but their needs are potentially very different from another breed. And whatever the dog's needs are should match what your true lifestyle is. And I think that's where we have to be honest with ourselves. What is my true lifestyle? Am I really that much of an outdoorsman, that much of an exercise person, or do I just wish I was? Make their decision based on what you really are. And if it starts to change by you getting a dog, then maybe your next breed will be the more athletic one, but we got to be honest about what we can provide for the dog rather than just what does the dog provide for us.
So what's your favorite breed?
I'm a Malinois person. I am through and through. I don't have one currently. I lost I've had 6 Malinois in my time. Yeah, and I lost my most favorite, Tommy, 4 years ago. It'll be 4 years in July. I'm thinking about it. I'm thinking about maybe a puppy in the coming year. But it was just, it was a hard hit. He was my guy. And I also am being realistic with myself. I'm going to be 56 next month. Do I have the stamina to have another Malinois if he lives 10, 12, 15 years? That puts me pretty close to 70 by the time that dog is passing away. Is it fair for me to get another Mal or not? So I'm considering it. That's my absolute all-time favorite. Right now, I have a duck toller. She's adorable, love her to death, a lot of fun. But she's a selfish little dog. She doesn't live and breathe for me. And I have a terrier who cracks me up. He's just a pistol, but he's a lot of fun for tricks and stuff like that. But he's all terrier. He's a fun dog. So I like just about everything, but the Malinois have my heart. Yeah.
Wow. Before talking to me, I want to point out, when you talk about terrier, people tend to think they're little, so they don't need to have a lot of exercise.
You better do something with them or they'll tear up your house. Mm-hmm.
Built to do works. They built to do stuff, even though they're little, because I live in a very crowded place. I live in California. So, people tend to have dogs that's smaller in size because they live in tighter space. And then they got those little terriers, right? They're very cute and small and fit the size of the house. But then those are the dogs need work, real work.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, if you don't find a job for them, they'll find one. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a kind of the side point of recent years. A lot of those feral dogs get popular because they're right size. They're about 30, 40 pounds, so really popular in California and the Washington area, because they're like just right size. Most people don't like 10-pound dog. They don't want an 80-pound dog. They want somewhere in between. And so they got really popular, and they start like adopting dogs from other countries because they're just the right size for the household. But those dogs come with obviously other problems. Well, my favorite breed. Well, I never had one yet, but when I grew up, I've always wanted a German Shepherd.
Mm.
And so I think my next dog will be a German Shepherd. I don't think I'm ready for a Malinois yet. That's probably too intense for me, I think.
They're fun.
So, but we also know, you probably would agree, is that nowadays German Shepherd's breeding is really, really bad. Most of them. It's hard to have to, find a group breeder and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Because I've seen a lot of bad German Shepherd, just bad breeding, like with all the problems they're having. But yeah, I probably would still say that's my bucket list dog.
Nice dogs. Yeah, you got to find a good one, but they're nice dogs.
Yeah, I wanted to adopt one before I had my current dog. I got rejected. I was like, oh, I never really had a dog before, or whatever. You can't have one. Wow. And they even sent me an email to say, you're the reason, people like you are the reason why the dog's back to the shelter, because you don't know what you'll get yourself into.
Wow.
Yeah. And then
judgmental.
So I end up getting a foreign dog because that's the only dog I can get at the time.
Wow.
Yeah. And, things happened interesting ways, just like you said, like it just happened. So I end up with a Taiwan dog, and now my training is most of feral dogs from Taiwan. That's kind of like happened that way.
Interesting. Yeah, that's a tough. Those aren't easy dogs to acclimate to society. Not easy. Not necessarily always problematic, but more often than not, so locked inside themselves when we try to have them be a part of the world we want them to live in, I mean, I don't know about you, but I know when I have a dog, my goal for them is not only that they're in the house with me or that they're going to go for a walk with me, but they travel with me, they camp with me, they hike with me. If I go to an outdoor cafe, they're with me. If I go visit my friends, they have dogs, they can run together. I have a very clear vision of the life I want my dog to enjoy with me. And to get a feral dog, and is that going to fit the vision that a person has for their life with a dog? That might be a tough bill to fill, because I didn't get the best start.
Yeah, it's definitely have its quirks and really things you don't know what's really caught you off guard. It's things that no one knows when they get the dog. In fact, most of people nowadays adopt foreign dogs, like including myself. We didn't even see the dog. We pick up the dog at the airport the day the dog got shipped over. So you know nothing about the dog except whatever the rescue or the foster are telling you. Now, are they professionals or are they withholding informations, right? You won't, and we all know the dog would acting very differently at a foster place versus become a permanent resident at your home. So that's play a huge role, I think, over times. I've done, obviously, because I've done so much work with my dog, that's kind of brought me into this journey, become a dog trainer. And I see my clients continue to struggle because the things they simply didn't prepare for. They didn't know what they really get themselves into when they got the dog. I think that's really one of the biggest disconnect in my line of work when work with feral dogs. Most people didn't get the reason they struggle so much is simply because they were feral dogs in a sense. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a challenge with, and I get it. It's a double-edged sword for anybody that works in a rescue or a shelter environment. You have to tell a story in order to get that dog placed, but people fall in love with a story rather than really understanding what they might be setting themselves up for in the journey they're going to have to take to change that story for the dog and what they're going to have going forward. And I think that's a tough thing for us sometimes as dog trainers is getting people, okay, the story that he came with is the past. We have to let that go and let's write a new story going forward. Because if we can't wrap our heads around that, we're gonna unintentionally, unknowingly keep the dog stuck in the behavior that they're displaying right now. So letting go of the story is a tough thing to help people understand.
What are some like out of box stuff you've done to a dog, or maybe multiple occasions that you're like, wow, I did something not working, then I decided to do something that just outrageous or never thought I would done, and that actually worked?
Oh my gosh, that's a tough one. That's a big question. Well, I don't know if it's out of the box or not. I think that when I hit walls, I've learned to experiment. For one thing, like I can tell you, one of the things I do frequently now, it's not necessarily out of the box at all, but I figured out with a lot of these dogs that are really apprehensive, they have a lot of anxiety, kind of, standoffish, not real trusting with humans, that kind of thing. One of the things that I incorporate relatively quickly is I challenge them physically rather quickly. For instance, we'll get outside and we'll have them walk along a retaining wall, or I'll take them to a children's playground and put them on make them climb up the graded stairs, or make them get on that little swaying bridge, the wooden bridge that sways back and forth. These physical challenges that are daunting for them. And I'm sure they're, if we want to say fearful or afraid. And a lot of people would say, well, your dog is stressed right now, don't do that. And I certainly have been accused of that. Don't do that, he's stressed. Well, I know he's stressed. I know that, but he's not in distress. He's not panicking. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to very safely guide him through this process, because the thing that I know is once I get him to do it once, I can get him to do it a second time. I get him to do it a third time. It gets easier and easier and easier. That particular approach to those dogs that are really anxiety ridden, shy, have some fear biting type of issues, it's amazing when you teach them that they're capable and that the sky will not fall today under your watch, how much you can build a relationship. And when you build that relationship of trust and they learn that, yes, they can follow you through these experiences that formerly seemed terrifying, they'll come out of their shell and they'll start to explore more and more on their own. So that is something I think I learned a number of years ago that is probably counterintuitive for a dog owner. They wouldn't think about pushing their dog to attempt to do some of these things. And I do use that word. I'll use that word. We're going to push today. We're going to push incrementally. I'm not going to push your dog into distress, but we are going to push. And that's a lesson I think I took, when you asked me to do this, I think I mentioned to you that I was in an accident many years ago, and I was in a wheelchair, had to learn how to walk again, blah, blah, blah. I learned that from my physical therapist. They didn't have a pity party for me because I was in a wheelchair. They didn't let me sit there every day at therapy and go, oh, let me talk about my story and how terrible it was and it hurts. And they said, get up, do 10 more. Okay, that was great, Robin, you did it. Now you're going to do 11 tomorrow. That was awesome. And they pushed me. And because of that, I healed. I got better. I grew. And so I think that's a philosophy that would potentially be considered out of the box for an owner. I think it's considered out of the box for some dog trainers that aspire to the philosophy that any sort of stress is harmful. I think that's nonsense to believe that. I think stress, when it's approached properly, it's no longer stress once the dog understands it. And I think that's what makes our dogs more resilient and therefore far more capable of living with us in our, human world. So that's one thing that I think is pretty significant.
What doesn't kill you make you stronger, right?
That's what they say.
It's interesting you say this because in human world, well, I remember I watched TV show and then there's this lady, she was, accident or something, and the doctor told her she will never walk again. And she ended up walking and they deemed it a miracle. And when they asked her, she said she never believed that can be true, like she never gonna walk again. She still needs some sort of device to keep her ankle because she doesn't have feeling there, but she can stand up and walk. And it's really like fascinating when it comes to human being, we talk about the willpower. Like you have to believe, okay, you're gonna have to do this, and some miracles sometimes do happen. It's really just so strong. You're like, you somehow believed you can do this from inside, and eventually physically you're able to do that. And when it comes to dogs, when I interviewed Mark Goldberg, he make one thing very interesting. He said, the dog want to change. They don't need you to convince them that they need to do better. Like they want to be better, but I do agree the part that most of our dog owners not allow our dogs to do better. I think that's part of it, like get the dog stuck because the owner can't put the dog through those scenarios because they think like, oh my gosh, my dog can never do that.
And I think most people get stuck there because they feel bad. They read the body language. There's obviously stress. They feel bad for the dog. They don't know how to fix it. And I think that's where we come in. We have to teach them how to fix it. And when we show them the possibility, I think the vast majority of owners are then willing to do the work, and they can help the dog and the dog can change. I do think it's interesting that occasionally we come across an owner who says they want to make change, but I don't think they really do, because I think they quite honestly enjoy the story of how challenging their dog is, and they get more satisfaction out of telling their story than actually helping the dog change. And that's far and few between, thankfully, but I have seen that a couple times. And that's kind of a real sad situation.
Yeah, I've seen that a couple times. Somebody like used to really reach out, like always want to say, oh, I need to take my dog to training. They will post the dog ate a whole pizza by accident. Dog take the family drugs by accident. The dog did that. And every time they will schedule training and they never show up. Oh, we're too busy. But they will continue to post those things like how bad their dogs were. So I had to point out like, okay, they just need more attention about those things rather than actually want to change the situation at that point. And back to the point, when you talk about challenge them physically, it's really a line part. I always incorporate some agility in my training because I tell my clients that, okay, when your dog knows they can jump that high, that really makes them feel they're special. They're like, oh, I'm really good at this. And I have clients like, oh, my dog can never jump that high. And then their dog can jump like 3 tables high, those, what are those, I don't remember the name. Not endorsing anything, but those platform, expensive things.
Yeah.
They can jump 3 of them at once. And my client's like, oh, impossible, my dog can't do this.
Right?
Yeah, and that's instant like confidence building, as well as really, I feel the dogs see the owner differently. The relationship kind of like changing or switch from that point on, because dogs like, wow, you actually made me do this.
Yeah, it does switch. You're right about that. It switches, and that's a good thing when it switches to that. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I think too many dogs probably think this human is kind of weak, and therefore I better just take charge of making, the decisions. And sometimes that decision is, let's just hide in the corner because this human is too weak to get me down the street safely. It's not always aggressive behavior or anything else. It's just quitting behavior because that is what the human has allowed over and over and over. So.
Yeah. Wow. We're chat for a while. We're towards the end of our interview here. So before we go, like, how can people find you and discover more about your work?
two websites actually. My company here in Dubuque is That's My Dog, so it's that'smydog.com, and then personal website with my name, which is Robin, Robin, and the funny last name, Mac, M-A-C, Farlane, Farlane.com. So that's the other one. But that's how they can find me. So
Awesome. I'm so glad you're able to join me today. Thank you so much for your time.
thanks for the interview. This was a lot of fun.